Welcome to the Chapter 8 lecture about international trade. This chapter will introduce several new models as well as the impact of trade on consumer and producer surplus. The chapter finishes with a discussion about current trade policy in the United States. Let's start with a few definitions. Goods and services purchased from other countries are imports. Goods and services sold to other countries are exports. Globalization is the phenomenon of growing economic linkages among countries. To understand why international trade occurs and why economists believe it is beneficial to the economy, we will first review the concept of comparative advantage. A country has a comparative advantage in producing a good or service if the opportunity cost of producing the good or service is lower for that country than for other countries. The Ricardian model of international trade analyzes international trade under the assumption that opportunity costs are constant. Autarky is a situation in which a country cannot trade with other countries. The next slide shows hypothetical production possibility frontiers for the United States and Mexico, where we assume that 1. There are only two goods, auto parts and airplanes, and 2. The production possibilities frontiers are straight lines. Since the PPF is a straight line, opportunity cost is constant. The opportunity cost of each bundle of auto parts in terms of airplanes is 2. 2 airplanes must be foregone for every individual bundle of auto parts produced. The Mexican opportunity cost for each bundle of auto parts in terms of airplanes is 0.5. Only 0.5 of an airplane must be foregone for every additional bundle of auto parts produced. So Mexico has a comparative advantage in auto parts, and the United States has a comparative advantage in airplanes. In autarky, CUS is the U.S. production and consumption bundle, and CM is the Mexican production and consumption bundle. We can also set up an opportunity cost table showing the same information from the production possibility frontiers. The U.S. opportunity cost for one bundle of auto parts is 2 airplanes, and the opportunity cost of one airplane is a half bundle of auto parts. The Mexican opportunity cost of one bundle of auto parts is a half an airplane, and the opportunity cost of one airplane is two bundles of auto parts. The Ricardian model of international trade shows that trade between two countries makes both countries better off than they would be in autarky. That is, there are gains from trade. The following tables and figures illustrate that specialization has the effect of increasing total world production of both goods and that each country can consume more of both goods than it did under autarky. When the United States and Mexico do not trade with one another, production and consumption will be the same for both countries. Take a minute to pause the lecture and to review the table. When the United States and Mexico specialize in the production of the good in which they have the comparative advantage, total production increases. Again, take a minute to pause the lecture and review the table. Trade increases world production of both goods, allowing both countries to consume more. Here, each country specializes in production as a result of trade. The United States produces at QUS and Mexico produces at QM. Total world production of airplanes has risen from 1,500 to 2,000 and auto parts from 1,500 bundles to 2,000 bundles. The United States can now consume bundle C prime US and Mexico can now consume bundle C prime M. Consumption bundles that were unattainable without trade. This table summarizes our findings and confirms that there are gains from trade. 250 more bundles of auto parts and 250 more airplanes are produced when the United States and Mexico specialize in trade. Sources of comparative advantage. The main sources of comparative advantage are international differences in climate. For example, winter deliveries of Chilean grapes to the United States. We are able to enjoy many different fruits and vegetables during the winter due to trade with Chile. Differences in technology and differences in factor endowments. The relationship between comparative advantage and factor availability is found in an influential model of international trade, the Heckscher-Ohlin model. The Heckscher-Ohlin model, according to the Heckscher-Ohlin model, a country has a comparative advantage in a good whose production is intensive in the factors that are abundantly available in that country. A key concept in the model is factor intensity. The factor intensity of production of a good is a measure of which factor is used in relatively greater quantities than other factors in production. For example, oil refining is capital intensive compared to clothing manufacturing because oil refiners use a higher ratio of capital to labor than clothing producers. The Heckscher-Ohlin model shows how comparative advantage can arise from differences in factor endowments. Goods differ in their factor intensity, and countries tend to export goods that are intensive in the factors that they have in abundance. Trade in manufactured goods amongst developed countries is best explained by increasing returns to production. Supply, demand, and international trade. Let's analyze the effects of imports. The domestic demand curve shows how the quantity of a good demanded by domestic consumers depends on the price of that good. The domestic supply curve shows how the quantity of a good supplied by domestic producers depends on the price of that good. The world price of a good is the price at which the good can be bought or sold abroad. When a market is open to trade, competition among importers or exporters drives the domestic price to equality with the world price. If the world price is lower than the autarky price, trade leads to imports and a fall in the domestic price compared to the world price. There are overall gains from trade because consumer gains exceed producer losses. Consumer surplus is a measure of welfare gains to consumers by participating in the market. Producer surplus is a measure of welfare gains to producers by participating in the market. In the absence of trade, domestic price is PA, the autarky price at which domestic supply curve and the domestic demand curve intersect. The quantity produced and consumed domestically is QA. Consumer surplus is represented by the blue shaded area, and producer surplus is represented by the pink or red shaded area. Now let's look at the domestic market with imports. Here the world price of auto parts, PW, is below the autarky price of PA. When the economy is open to international trade, imports enter the domestic market, and the domestic price falls from the autarky price PA to the world price PW. As price falls, the domestic quantity demanded rises from QA to QD, and the domestic quantity supplied falls from QA to QS. The difference between domestic quantity demanded and domestic quantity supplied at PW, the quantity QD minus QS, is filled by imports. When the domestic price falls to PW as a result of international trade, consumers gain additional surplus, areas X and Z, and producers lose surplus, area X. Because the gains to consumers outweigh the losses to producers, there's an increase in the total surplus in the economy as whole, area Z. The effect of exports. If the world price is higher than the Otaki price, trade leads to exports and a rise in the domestic price compared with the world price. There are overall gains from trade because producer gains exceed the consumer losses. The graph that follows shows the domestic market with exports. Here, the world price PW is greater than the Otaki price PA. When the economy is open to international trade, some of the domestic supply is now exported. The domestic price rises from the Otaki price PA to the world price PW. As the price rises, the domestic quantity demanded falls from QA to QD, and the domestic quantity supply rises from QA to QS. The portion of domestic production that is not domestically consumed is exported. When the domestic price rises to PW as a result of trade, producers gain additional surplus, areas X plus Z, but consumers lose surplus, area X. Because the gains to producers outweigh the losses to consumers, there is an increase in the total surplus in the economy as a whole, area Z. International trade and wages. Exporting industries produce goods and services that are sold abroad. Import competing industries produce goods and services that are also imported. International trade tends to increase the demand for factors that are abundant in the country compared with other countries, and to decrease the demand for factors that are scarce in our country compared to other countries. As a result, the prices of abundant factors tend to rise, and the prices of scarce factors tend to fall as international trade grows. Effects of trade protection. An economy is free to trade when the government does not attempt either to reduce or to increase the levels of exports and imports that occur naturally as a result of supply and demand. Policies that limit imports are known as trade protection or simply as protection. Most economists advocate free trade, although many governments engage in trade protection of import competing industries. The two most common protectionist policies are tariffs and import quotas. In rare instances, government subsidize export industries. Effects of a tariff. A tariff is a tax levied on imports. It raises the domestic price above the world price, leading to a fall in trade and total consumption and a rise in domestic production. Domestic producers and the government gain, but consumer losses more than offset this gain, leading to deadweight loss in total surplus. A tariff raises the domestic price of a good from PW to PT. The domestic quantity shrinks from QD to QDT, and the domestic quantity supplied increases from QS to QST. As a result, imports, which had been QD minus QS before the tariff was imposed, shrink to QDT minus QST after the tariff is imposed. When the domestic price rises as a result of the tariff, producers gain additional surplus, area A. The government gains revenue, area C, and consumers lose surplus, areas A, B, C, and D. Because the losses to consumers outweigh the gains to producers and the government, the economy as a whole loses surplus, areas B plus D. Effects of an import quota. An import quota is a legal limit on the quantity of a good that can be imported. Its effect is like that of a tariff, except that revenues and quota rents accrue to the license holder, not to the government. The political economy of trade protection. Arguments for trade protection. Advocates of trade and import quotas offer a variety of arguments. The three common arguments are national security, job creation, and the infant industry argument. Despite deadweight losses, Import protections are often imposed because groups representing import competing industries are smaller and more cohesive than groups